The great crystal chamber stretched high above like a cathedral made of starlight. Hundreds of alien beings sat in floating seats that curved around the central platform. Some had 6 arms, others breathed different gases through masks, and a few glowed with their own inner light. This was the Galactic Council, where the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy made decisions that affected trillions of lives. Ambassador Thek walked slowly to the center platform. His silver skin caught the light from a dozen different suns streaming through the crystal walls. The Valian Empire had sent their best diplomat, someone who had seen things that would give nightmares to most beings. His hands shook slightly as he activated the holographic projector. 3 years ago, Thek said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber, we received a distress signal from the Outer Rim. A small human colony had been attacked by raiders from the Hegemony fleet. What we found there changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. The air above the platform shimmered and formed into the image of a man. Li Hyun looked tired, his face marked with burns and cuts. His uniform was torn and bloody, but his eyes burned with something that made even the oldest council members lean forward. My name is Captain Li Hyun of the human vessel Soul's Pride, the recording began. We were delivering medical supplies to Kepler colony when the attack came. 3 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace without any warning. They didn't even try to talk first. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. The Hegemony was known for their brutal efficiency, but they usually demanded surrender before opening fire. The colony was home to about 5,000 people, Li Hyun continued. Farmers mostly, some engineers, lots of families with children. They grew food and fixed things. They never hurt anyone. But when those ships started bombing from orbit, something changed in all of us. Council member Vex, a creature that looked like a walking tree with too many eyes, waved a branch dismissively. Another sob story from a primitive species. Do we really need to waste time on this? Thek's silver skin darkened to almost black, a sign of deep anger among his people. Captain Li Hyun held off 3 Hegemony battle cruisers for 6 hours, using nothing but a mining ship, a ship designed to crack asteroids, not fight wars. The chamber filled with surprised murmurs. Admiral Korth of the Hegemony fleet stood up from his seat, his forearms spreading wide. That's impossible. Our scans show humans are weak. They barely figured out how to travel between stars. They should have surrendered immediately when they saw our superior firepower. That's what everyone thought, Thek replied. But humans don't think like us. When Li Hyun saw those ships bombing civilians, he didn't calculate odds or consider tactical advantages. He just got angry. The hologram showed Li Hyun's hands clenching into fists. We had mining charges meant for breaking rocks. I loaded them into our cargo launcher and fired them at the lead ship. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Blew a hole right through their main engine. Impossible, Korth repeated, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. The other 2 ships turned their guns on me, Li Hyun's image continued. I had no shields, no real weapons, and my ship was falling apart. But every minute I kept them busy was another minute for the evacuation ships to get away. So I kept firing. When I ran out of mining charges, I used cargo containers filled with metal scrap. When those were gone, I rammed one of their ships. The council chamber had gone completely quiet. Even the translator devices seemed to struggle with the concept of intentionally crashing one's own ship into an enemy vessel. I should have died in that collision, Li Hyun said, his voice getting quieter. My ship broke apart and I was floating in space in an emergency suit, but I watched those evacuation ships jump to hyperspace with 4,732 people on board. Men, women, children, all safe because I bought them time. Ambassador Thek let the recording continue. Here's what you need to understand about my species. We're not the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. But when you threaten our families, our children, our home, we become something else. Entirely. We become dangerous. Li Hyun looked directly at the camera, and his next words seemed to burn themselves into the minds of everyone watching. Tell your council this. We don't surrender when things get hard. We don't break when you hurt us, and we remember everything you do to us. Every single thing. The hologram faded, leaving the chamber in heavy silence. Thek looked around at the assembled aliens, seeing doubt in some faces and fear in others. The hegemony classified this incident as a minor skirmish with acceptable losses, Thek said. But I was there. I saw what one human did to 3 of their best ships. I've read the reports from other encounters. Humans fight differently than any species we've catalogued. They don't follow the normal rules of warfare. Admiral Korth stood again, trying to regain his composure. One lucky incident doesn't change tactical reality. Humans are inferior in every measurable way. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their ships are smaller and weaker. They have no unified government and constantly fight among themselves. That's exactly what makes them dangerous, Thek warned. They're unpredictable. When a Zephyrian warrior faces impossible odds, they calculate the probability of success and withdraw if it's too low. When a Corvan general sees superior forces, they negotiate for better terms. Humans see impossible odds and get angry. The debate continued for hours. Some council members agreed with Thek's assessment, but most sided with Admiral Korth. Humans were primitive, scattered across only a few dozen worlds, and posed no real threat to galactic civilization. Finally, the vote was called. Project Harvest, the systematic colonization and resource extraction from human worlds, passed by an overwhelming margin. Only Thek and a few others voted against it. As the council session ended and the various alien dignitaries filed out, Thek remained on the platform, staring at where Li Hyun's hologram had been. He thought about the captain's final words and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Somewhere in the outer rim, humans were going about their daily lives, unaware that the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy had just decided their fate. They were farming their crops, raising their children, and building their modest colonies. But Thek had seen what happened when humans were pushed too far. The galaxy was about to learn a very hard lesson about the difference between being weak and being harmless. And Thek feared that by the time the lesson was over, there wouldn't be much of the Galactic Council left to remember it. The massive alien ship called Dominator blocked out the sun as it hung above Earth like a steel mountain. Admiral Korth stood on its bridge, looking down at the blue and green planet through the viewport. Around his flagship, 199 other hegemony warships waited in perfect formation. Each one was the size of a city, bristling, with weapons that could crack planets. Far below them, 30 small human ships struggled to form a defensive line. They looked like toys compared to the alien armada. Some were old cargo vessels hastily fitted with weapons. Others were patrol, boats that had never been designed for real combat. The humans had scrambled together everything they could find in just 6 hours since the alien fleet had appeared. On the bridge of the human flagship Incheon, Captain Park Min stared at the tactical display showing all those red dots representing enemy ships. The numbers made his stomach turn, 200 against 30. Each alien ship was at least 5 times bigger than his largest vessel. Any military computer would calculate their chances of winning at exactly 0%. Lieutenant Kim So-young turned from her communication station, her face pale and her hands shaking. She had joined the Space Navy to explore distant stars and help colonists, not to fight impossible battles against alien invaders. "Sir," she said, her voice barely steady, "they're sending a message on all frequencies. They want us to power down our weapons and surrender completely. They're giving us 1 hour." Park Min looked around his bridge crew. These were good people, trained professionals who deserved better than dying in a hopeless fight. His tactical officer was 23 years old. His navigator had 3 children waiting for him at home. His weapons officer had been planning to retire next year. But as he watched the alien ships positioning themselves for an attack, something ancient stirred in Park Min's chest. His grandfather had told him stories about the old wars, when their peninsula had been invaded by enemies with superior numbers and better weapons. Those ancestors could have surrendered too. They could have calculated the odds and decided resistance was pointless. Instead, they had fought with farming tools against professional armies. They had held mountain passes with handfuls of volunteers against thousands of trained soldiers. They had made the invaders pay for every inch of ground with blood and sacrifice. "Signal all ships," Park Min ordered, his voice carrying across the bridge with quiet determination. "Tell them we're not rolling over for these bastards." Kim So-young stared at him for a moment, then nodded and began transmitting the message to the other human vessels. Across the small fleet, captains and crews received the same order. They weren't going to surrender, they weren't going to run, they were going to fight. The battle began at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon, Earth time. Admiral Korth had expected it to last maybe 10 minutes. His ships had better shields, stronger weapons, and centuries of military experience. The humans should have been wiped out before they could even return fire. But humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, didn't fight the way military textbooks said they should. Commander Jiang Wu commanded the frigate Busan, one of the smallest ships in the human fleet. When 3 hegemony cruisers focused their fire on his vessel, his shields collapsed in seconds. His weapons went offline. His engine room reported critical damage and recommended immediate evacuation. Instead of retreating or surrendering, Jiang Wu did something that no alien tactical computer had been programmed to expect. He aimed his crippled ship directly at the nearest enemy cruiser and pushed his damaged engines far beyond their safety limits. "All hands, abandon ship," he announced over the intercom. "I'm taking this bastard with me." The Busan, burning and falling apart, smashed into the hegemony cruiser's engine section at full speed. Both ships vanished in a brilliant explosion that lit up the darkness of space like a new star. The alien ship, 10 times larger and supposedly invincible, died along with the tiny human frigate. Admiral Korth watched the explosion from his bridge, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. "What did they just do?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "The human vessel deliberately rammed our cruiser," came the stunned reply. "Both ships destroyed. No survivors." This wasn't how space battles worked. Ships were expensive and took years to build. Crews were trained professionals who represented massive investments in time and resources. No sane commander would throw away both just to take down one enemy vessel, but the humans weren't done surprising them. Lieutenant Colonel Han Ji-woo piloted a small fighter called Ghost of Seoul. Her ship was fast but lightly armed, designed for reconnaissance rather than combat. When the main battle started, she should have stayed back and provided intelligence reports. Instead, she dove straight into the middle of the alien formation, dodging massive energy blasts that could have vaporized her tiny craft. Her target was Admiral Korth's flagship, the biggest and most heavily defended ship in the enemy fleet. "Ghost of Seoul to all units," she transmitted as enemy fire tore through her ship's hull. "It's been an honor serving with you all." Her fighter, trailing fire and losing pieces of its hull, punched through the Dominator's defensive screen and slammed directly into the flagship's bridge. The explosion wasn't big enough to destroy the massive ship, but it killed dozens of senior officers and left Admiral Korth's command structure in chaos. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships that should have retreated instead charged directly at the enemy. Captains who should have surrendered when their weapons failed instead used their ships as guided missiles. Pilots who should have ejected when their fighters were damaged instead aimed for the most vital parts of alien vessels. The hegemony fleet, despite its overwhelming advantages, found itself taking casualties it had never expected. These weren't tactical losses from superior strategy or better technology. These were losses from pure, stubborn determination to make the enemy pay for every victory. After 2 hours of fighting, the human fleet was completely destroyed. Every ship was either debris or drifting wreckage. Admiral Korth had lost 12 major vessels and hundreds of smaller craft to an enemy that should have been swept aside in minutes. He waited for the surrender signal from Earth. Protocol demanded that the defeated enemy formally submit and agree to occupation terms. His communications officer prepared to receive the expected message of capitulation. Instead, every screen on every hegemony ship suddenly showed the same image. Captain Park Min sat in what looked like an underground bunker, his uniform torn and blood running down his face from a head wound. Behind him, other human officers worked frantically at computer terminals. "My name is Captain Park Min of the Earth Defense Force," he said, looking directly into the camera with eyes that burned with quiet fury. "You've just destroyed our space fleet. You think that means you've won?" Admiral Korth leaned forward in his command chair, expecting to hear terms of surrender. "You're wrong," Park Min continued. We've been preparing for this day since we first detected your ships approaching our system. Every major city has underground bunkers. Every military base has been hardened against orbital bombardment. Every citizen has been trained in resistance. Tactics? The human captain paused, wiping blood from his forehead. You wanted a war with humanity, Park Min said, his voice growing harder with each word. You thought we'd roll over and submit when you showed us your big ships and superior firepower. Congratulations. You just kicked the biggest hornet's nest in the galaxy. The transmission ended, leaving the hegemony fleet in stunned silence. Admiral Korth stared at the blank screen, finally beginning to understand what Ambassador Thek had tried to warn the Council about. These humans didn't think like civilized beings. They didn't calculate odds or consider rational surrender when faced with impossible situations. They just got angry and started fighting back. The war that was supposed to last 3 weeks had dragged on for 6 brutal months. What started as a simple invasion had turned into something the alien commanders never expected, a nightmare that kept getting worse. General Vorth stood in what used to be the heart of New Tokyo, but now the city looked like a graveyard. Broken. Buildings reached toward the sky like broken teeth, and smoke rose from fires that never seemed to go out. His soldiers, the same ones who had conquered dozens of planets without breaking a sweat, were now hiding behind concrete blocks and twisted metal, jumping at every sound. These weren't the same confident warriors who had marched through the stars. Now they whispered to each other in the dark, sharing stories that made no sense. Stories about humans who fought like demons, who never gave up even when they should have been dead 10 times over. The man causing all this trouble used to build houses for a living. Choi Dae-ho had worked with his hands his whole life, putting up walls and laying foundations. But when the aliens came, he learned something new. He figured out how their plasma weapons worked just by watching and trying. Now he could take apart an alien squad with the same careful attention he once used to frame a roof. His right-hand person was Dr. Yoon Hye-jin, a woman who used to spend her days making sick children feel better. She had gentle hands that knew exactly how to comfort a crying baby or set a broken arm. Those same gentle hands now built bombs from stolen alien power cells. Every device she made was perfect, designed with the same precision she once used, to save lives. The aliens kept detailed records of every species they had ever fought. They had files on creatures that breathed poison gas, on warriors who could tear through steel with their bare claws, on civilizations that had ruled entire galaxies, but nothing in their vast libraries prepared them for humans. General Vorth sent another report back to his home world, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke into the communication device. The humans didn't follow any rules of war that made sense. Yesterday something happened that would haunt him forever. A small human child, maybe 10 years old, had walked up to their command post, carrying what looked like a simple backpack. The explosion had been massive. The entire forward command center vanished in a ball of fire and twisted metal. 47 of his best officers died in an instant. The child's name was Lee Min-ho, and he had done it because he watched the aliens execute his mother and father in the street outside his home. This wasn't how wars were supposed to work. Soldiers fought soldiers. Children were supposed to run away and hide until the adults sorted things out. But human children apparently didn't understand these rules. They picked up weapons almost as tall as they were and fought with the same desperate fury as trained warriors. On another world entirely, something even more impossible was happening. Kepler 442b was supposed to be an easy target, just farmers and people who worked the land. The invasion plan called for a quick sweep through the countryside, then move on to the real cities where the fighting would happen. But at a place called Horizon Ridge, an old soldier named Bae Sung-min had other ideas. He had fought in human wars years ago, back when humans only fought each other. Now he stood in a narrow mountain pass with 47 ordinary people, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, parents. None of them had any real military training. They carried hunting rifles that were older than some of their children. For 3 months, this tiny group held off an entire alien division. Thousands of professional soldiers with advanced weapons couldn't get past one old man and a handful of civilians who just refused to quit. Every day the aliens attacked, and every day they were thrown back. The humans used everything they could find: Farm tools became weapons, tractors became armored vehicles, and knowledge of their own land became their greatest advantage. When the alien reinforcements finally broke through and reached the pass, they found something that would be talked about in their military academies for generations. Bai Sung-min sat against an old tree, his rifle still in his hands, his eyes still open and watching the pass he had sworn to defend. Around his position lay the bodies of 200 alien soldiers. The old farmer had died exactly where he chose to die, doing exactly what he chose to do. He never retreated, never surrendered, never stopped fighting. Even in death, he looked like he was still on guard duty. This was when the hegemony commanders finally understood their mistake. They hadn't invaded a planet full of weak creatures who would bow down to superior technology. They had attacked something far more dangerous, a species that simply refused to accept defeat, no matter how impossible the odds became. The sleeping dragon had awakened, and its fury was beyond anything they had ever imagined. The war had taken a deadly turn that no alien commander saw coming. What started as their invasion had become their worst nightmare. Now the hunters had become the hunted, and the humans were getting very good at this new game. Captain Zektar thought he was safe. His supply ship, the Abundance, was supposed to be far from any fighting. These vessels carried food, weapons, and fuel to the front lines, but they never saw combat themselves. The route through deep space had been used hundreds of times without any problems. It should have been just another boring supply run, but then every alarm on his ship started screaming at once. The sound was so loud and sudden that several crew members jumped out of their seats. Zektar's blood turned cold as he realized what was happening. Somehow impossibly, the humans had found them again. The attack came fast and brutal. A crude metal pod, barely held together but packed with explosive force, smashed straight through their advanced hull like it was made of paper. The impact shook the entire ship, throwing aliens to the ground and sparking fires throughout the corridors. From that boarding pod came something terrifying, human marines who moved like they owned the place. Their leader was Staff Sergeant Oh Seung-hwan, a man who used to walk the streets of Seoul keeping the peace. Now he hunted through starship hallways with the same careful attention, except instead of arresting criminals, he was capturing alien vessels. Oh moved through the ship's corridors like a ghost, knowing exactly where to step to avoid making noise. His team followed behind him, each person knowing their job perfectly. These weren't random fighters. They were professionals who had studied their enemy and learned to beat them at their own game. "Secure the engineering deck," Oh whispered to his squad, his voice barely audible. "Remember, we need that navigation computer in one piece." The humans had learned something important. It wasn't enough to just destroy alien ships. They needed to capture them, to take their technology and turn it against its makers. Every computer, every weapon system, every piece of equipment was valuable if you knew how to use it. Private First Class Lim Soo-jin was proof of how far humans would go to win this war. She was only 22 years old, barely an adult, but she had already lost her left arm in a previous battle. Most people would have gone home after an injury like that, not Lim. She taught herself to work with one hand, becoming even more dangerous than before. She moved through the alien ships, security systems like she had designed them herself. Every lock, every alarm, every defensive measure fell apart under her touch. She had spent countless hours studying captured alien technical manuals, learning their language and their technology better than some of the aliens who built it. Within 30 minutes, another alien ship belonged to humanity. The crew was either dead or captured, and humans were already learning how to operate systems that had taken the aliens centuries to develop. But the real shock came when the aliens realized who was commanding these attacks. Admiral Kim Tae-young stood on the bridge of a massive warship that used to be called Inevitable Victory. Now it was called New Gwangju, and it served humanity instead of the alien empire. Kim had once been a simple merchant captain, moving cargo between Earth and the outer colonies. She knew how to navigate dangerous space routes and how to keep a crew working together under pressure, but she had never commanded a warship in her life. Now, she controlled an entire fleet of captured alien vessels, each one crewed by humans who had learned to think like their enemies. Her tactical officer, Commander Seo Jung-woo waited for orders as they approached their next target. Kim studied the star charts with the same cold calculation that alien generals had once used against her people. "Target the alien supply depot at Proxima Station," she ordered without hesitation. "No survivors." This was the new reality of the war. Humans had stopped just defending themselves. Now they were taking the fight to the enemy's home territory, using the aliens' own weapons and ships against them. Every victory made them stronger and their enemies weaker. The alien empire's greatest advantage had always been their ability to predict what their enemies would do. They had fought wars across the galaxy for 10,000 years, and they thought they understood how civilized species behaved in combat. Their computers could calculate millions of possible battle scenarios and choose the best response for each one. But humans broke all their calculations. Humans didn't follow the rules that other species accepted. They didn't surrender when they were supposed to. They didn't retreat when any reasonable commander would pull back. They adapted faster than the alien computers could keep up with, and they never stopped learning new ways to win. Ambassador Thek's warnings were now being broadcast through every alien command center in the galaxy. The reports kept coming in, each one worse than the last. Human hunting parties were roaming through deep space, attacking supply convoys and communication relays. Human agents had somehow infiltrated core alien worlds, gathering intelligence and sabotaging important facilities. Most terrifying of all, human children were being trained as soldiers from the moment they could walk. The galaxy's most powerful empire was starting to realize they had made a terrible mistake. They thought they were conquering a weak species that would quickly submit to superior force. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than themselves, an enemy that refused to stay defeated. 7 long years had passed since the aliens first arrived at Earth's doorstep with their ultimatum. 7 years since they thought they could crush humanity like every other species they had conquered. Now the most powerful beings in the galaxy were hiding in the darkest corners of space, praying that humans wouldn't find them. The emergency meeting was happening aboard a space station called Last Hope, hidden deep inside a nebula where sensors couldn't easily detect it. The station's name said everything about how desperate things had become. This wasn't a gathering of confident rulers planning their next conquest. This was a group of survivors trying to figure out how their empire had collapsed so completely. The original 47 members who once ruled the galaxy, only 12 were still alive. The rest had fallen to human forces that seemed to be everywhere at once, striking without warning and leaving no survivors behind. Ambassador Thek walked slowly to the center of the room, and everyone could see how much the war had changed him. The proud diplomat who once threatened to wipe out entire worlds now looked like a broken old man. His silver skin, which used to shine with health and confidence, was now dull and scarred. 3 different encounters with human forces had left their mark on him, and each scar told a story of barely surviving something that should have been impossible. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the other council members had to lean forward to hear him. 7 years, he said, and those 2 words carried the weight of an empire's destruction. 7 years since we ignored the warnings about humanity. The massive screen at the front of the room showed what had happened to their once mighty empire. Red zones spread across the star map like a disease, marking every system that now belonged to humanity. These weren't just conquered territories, they were former alien strongholds that had been turned into human bases, with human families, living in cities that aliens had built over thousands of years. Intelligence Chief Maud stepped forward with his report, but his hands were shaking as he held the datapad. The numbers told a story that no one wanted to believe. "The humans haven't just pushed back our invasion forces," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "They have systematically hunted down and destroyed every single hegemony installation within 50 parsecs of their territory. This wasn't how wars were supposed to end. Usually one side would defeat the other, take control of important worlds, and the losing side would surrender or retreat to fight another day. But humans didn't seem interested in following those rules. They weren't content to just defend their own space. They were actively hunting down every trace of alien presence they could find. Admiral Kim Tae-young, the former cargo ship captain who now commanded the largest human fleet, had just finished destroying the hegemony stronghold at Vega Prime. The base had been considered impregnable, protected by weapons that could crack planets in half. It had lasted exactly 4 hours against her attack. Colonel Jung Hai-Wan's ground forces had liberated the slave camps on Arcturus III, where aliens had been using captured species as forced labor for decades. But Jung hadn't just freed the prisoners. Every alien overseer, every guard, every administrator had been systematically executed. The humans weren't interested in taking prisoners when it came to those who had enslaved others. Lieutenant Commander Park Ye-jin's reconnaissance ships had been spotted near the Andromeda approach vectors, which meant humans were already scouting routes to other galaxies. They weren't content to just control this one. They were already planning their expansion into territories that no one had ever successfully invaded. Ambassador Thek looked around the room at the survivors of what had once been the most powerful government in known space. "They don't want conquest," he said, and his words made everyone's blood run cold. "They want extinction, our extinction." The humans had made their intentions perfectly clear through their actions. They weren't interested in ruling over alien populations or extracting tribute from conquered worlds. They wanted every trace of the alien empire completely erased from existence. Every base, every ship, every record of their civilization was being systematically destroyed. The final transmission went out across all remaining alien communication networks. Counselor Nam Il-sung, broadcasting from his captured command vessel that humans had somehow turned against its former owners, delivered a message that would be remembered as long as any aliens remained alive. "Attention, all sentient species." His voice echoed across the galaxy. "Avoid human space. They do not negotiate. They do not forgive, and they never ever stop hunting." It was a warning that came too late for most, but it might save some species from making the same mistake the hegemony had made. Humans weren't like other civilizations that might be satisfied with partial victory or negotiated peace. They were relentless in a way that no other species had ever been. As the last council ship prepared to jump into the deepest reaches of dark space, hoping to disappear forever, their sensors picked up something that made everyone's heart stop. Incoming human vessels were approaching fast, and they weren't trying to hide their presence. The ships bore names painted in human script that the aliens had learned to fear: Indomitable Soul, Iron Busan, Eternal Jeju. Each name represented not just a vessel, but a promise that humanity would never stop, never give up, and never forgive what had been done to them. From the lead vessel came a transmission that cut through the static like a knife. "This is Fleet Admiral Choi Min-jun of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You have 30 seconds to surrender, or we will demonstrate why the galaxy fears us. The age of humanity had begun, and the universe would never be the same again."